Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee as the soft morning light filled the room. It was one of those quiet mornings that felt heavier than usual, not because of the silence, but because of what it reminded her of. The house that once echoed with laughter and conversations now felt like a place where time simply passed. The walls were the same, the furniture untouched, yet everything felt different since Mark left. He had been her husband for nearly 20 years, and though the end hadn't come with shouting or betrayal, it had come with something worse: indifference. One morning he just said, "I can't do this anymore," and walked away, leaving behind a marriage that had already been falling apart piece by piece. Sarah didn't chase after him. Maybe she was too tired, or maybe deep down she knew he was right. They had turned into two strangers sharing the same roof, pretending that love still lived there. After he left, Sarah learned that loneliness had many shapes: the quiet at dinner, the untouched pillow beside her, the way no one asked about her day anymore. But she wasn't entirely alone. Her son Ethan was still there, 17, kind-hearted, and full of a warmth that reminded her of what love should feel like. He had her eyes and Mark's smile, and even though he didn't say much, he noticed everything. She tried her best to keep things normal for him, cooking breakfast, asking about school, pretending everything was fine. But the truth was, some days she felt invisible even to herself. That morning, as Sarah stood by the counter spreading jam on toast, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the window. Her hair was messy, her eyes looked tired, and there were lines on her face she hadn't noticed before. She sighed softly. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped caring about how she looked. She used to love wearing bright colors, doing her makeup, putting on perfume, small things that made her feel alive. But now, those little joys had faded away. Just like everything else, Ethan walked in, rubbing his eyes still in his old hoodie. He yawned, grabbed a bowl from the cupboard, and poured himself some cereal. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice groggy but warm. "Morning," Sarah replied with a faint smile. She turned back to the stove, pretending to be busy. Hiding the weariness in her eyes, a few seconds passed before Ethan spoke again. "You look really pretty today." Sarah froze for a moment, surprised. It had been so long since anyone had said those words to her. She turned around, unsure if he was teasing. But he was just sitting there eating his cereal casually, completely unaware of the storm his words had started inside her. She smiled softly, trying not to let her voice shake. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind of you." Ethan looked up, smiled back, and said, "Well, it's true." Then he went back to eating like nothing had happened. Sarah felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just about being called pretty. It was about being seen. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone had noticed her. Not as a mother, not as someone holding things together, but simply as herself. That one small compliment carried more warmth than all the months of quiet she had endured. After Ethan left for school, Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom. She studied her reflection, the soft lines on her face, the gentle tiredness in her eyes. She hadn't really looked at herself this way in a long time. She touched her cheek lightly and smiled a little. Maybe she didn't look like she used to, but there was still something in her, something kind, something strong. On impulse, she opened her drawer, pulled out her favorite lipstick, a soft shade of rose she hadn't worn since Mark left, and applied it. She laughed quietly at herself, shaking her head. It was silly, maybe even unnecessary, but it felt good. For a moment, she didn't feel invisible. Later that day, she went out to run errands, grocery shopping, a stop at the post office, the usual things. But something was different. When people smiled at her, she smiled back. When she passed by a shop window, she didn't look away. Even the autumn air felt lighter. That one simple moment at breakfast had changed her day. She didn't realize it yet. But those small words from her son would become something she carried for years. They would be the spark that reminded her she was still capable of being happy, of being noticed, of being loved even after heartbreak. That evening, Sarah cooked dinner like she always did, but she added a little more effort this time. She made Ethan's favorite pasta and even set the table nicely. When he came home, he noticed right away. "Whoa, what's the occasion?" he asked with a grin. "Just felt like it," she said, smiling. They ate together, talking about his school day, his friends, the college letters starting to come in. He was growing up so fast, and she realized how much of her world revolved around him. She had spent so long giving, worrying, holding everything together, she had forgotten to live for herself. But now, with just one kind word, something had awakened in her heart, a quiet reminder that she was still here, still capable of feeling joy. After dinner, she stood at the porch while the evening breeze brushed her hair. The world outside was calm, the sky turning shades of orange and pink. She thought of Mark, of the years they had spent together, of how love could fade even without cruelty. Then she thought of Ethan, of his simple, honest kindness, and realized love didn't always have to be grand or perfect. Sometimes it was just in the words that came from someone who truly cared that night. Before going to bed, Sarah opened her old journal, the one she hadn't touched since her marriage ended. She wrote a single sentence. He said, "I looked pretty today." It might have seemed small to anyone else, but to her, it meant everything. It was a moment that reminded her she wasn't invisible. It reminded her that even in the quietest mornings, something beautiful could still begin. And though she didn't know it then, this tiny spark, born from her son's innocent words, would be the beginning of something new. A slow, gentle rediscovery of life, of hope, and eventually of love. But for now, as she lay in bed that night, Sarah simply smiled to herself and whispered softly, "Thank you, Ethan," 'cause sometimes all it takes to wake a heart that's forgotten how to feel is a single, unexpected act of kindness. And that morning, those few simple words from her son stayed with her, not just for the day, but for the rest of her life. The following Saturday morning, Sarah woke to the sound of rain tapping against her window. The world outside looked calm and gray, and for once, she didn't mind. There was something peaceful about the sound, like the earth was starting fresh. She had been trying to do the same. Ever since Ethan's kind words, something inside her had changed. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but she felt a small, steady warmth, returning, the kind that made her notice life again. She got dressed, pulling on her long beige coat and a light scarf. It had been a while since she had gone anywhere just for herself. So she decided to visit her favorite little bookstore downtown. A cozy place with wooden shelves, warm lighting, and the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. She used to go there all the time, years ago, back when she still dreamed about writing, back when her heart was full of hope instead of quiet. The bell above the door chimed as she walked in. The familiar scent greeted her instantly, and she smiled. The place looked the same, though a few new books lined the display tables. She wandered through the aisles slowly, running her fingers along the spines of novels she had once loved. For the first time in months, her thoughts weren't heavy. She felt at ease, like maybe she belonged here again, as she reached for a book near the end of a shelf. A voice spoke from behind her, calm, low, and friendly. "Excuse me," it said, "you're holding my favorite book." Startled, Sarah turned around. Standing there was a man about her age, tall, with short brown hair touched with gray and a kind expression. He wore a navy sweater and a leather jacket that had clearly seen years of use. His smile was easy, not the kind that demanded attention, the kind that made you feel safe. Sarah looked down at the book in her hands, Letters to Tomorrow. "Oh," she said, smiling a little. "I didn't realize it had fans." "Only the sentimental kind," he replied with a light laugh. "It's full of those quiet thoughts you never say out loud." She nodded, glancing at the cover. "That sounds like something I'd like." The man extended his hand. "I'm Daniel, Sarah," she said, shaking his hand. His grip was warm, his presence calm. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. I promise I won't fight you for the book." She laughed softly, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. They talked for a while right there between the shelves. He told her he was a high school English teacher, recently divorced, and trying to fill his quiet weekends with something other than television and leftover takeout. She shared that she used to work part-time at the library, but had taken a break to focus on her son. who was finishing high school, their conversation flowed naturally, like two people who had known each other longer than a few minutes. There was no awkwardness, no forced politeness, just an easy rhythm. When he spoke, Daniel looked at her like he was actually listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk. Sarah noticed how rare that was, and it made her want to keep talking. They moved toward the small cafe corner inside the bookstore, where they ordered coffee and sat near the window. Rain continued to fall outside, the sound soft and steady. Daniel asked her about the book she was reading at home, and she admitted she hadn't finished one in months. "I used to love reading," she said quietly, "but life got in the way." He smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time to start again. Some stories are worth coming back to, just like people." Something about that sentence stayed with her. She didn't say much after, just smiled faintly and looked out the window. She didn't know this man, not really, but in his company, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. An hour passed before she realized how long they'd been talking. Time seemed to move differently around him. Softer, slower. She finally stood, saying she should head home before the rain got worse. Daniel stood too and smiled. "It was nice meeting you, Sarah. I'm glad we reached for the same book." "Me too," she said honestly. Before she could leave, he added, "If you ever want someone to recommend you another one, I'm around here most weekends." Sarah hesitated for a moment. Then she smiled and said, "Maybe I'll take you up on that." She stepped outside into the drizzle. Her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. The world looked the same: gray skies, wet streets, people hurrying by, yet everything seemed softer. She walked slowly, the book in her hand, her scarf brushing against her cheek. She didn't fully understand why she felt so calm, but she did. When she reached home, Ethan was on the couch watching something on his phone. "Hey, Mom," he said casually. "You look happy. What's up?" Sarah smiled, setting the book on the counter. "I met someone interesting today." Ethan raised a brow but didn't pry. "A friend." "Maybe," she said with a shrug, though she wasn't sure what to call it. She went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed, still thinking about the conversation. About the way Daniel had spoken to her, not out of pity or politeness, but with genuine warmth. It had been so long since she had connected with someone that easily. She didn't want to read too much into it. Yet part of her couldn't help but wonder if this was life's way of reminding her that it wasn't over. That night she opened the book Daniel had recommended. As she read, one sentence caught her attention. "Sometimes we don't find people to fill the emptiness. We find them to remind us we were never empty to begin with." The words made her pause. She thought of Ethan, of the kindness that had sparked her change. And now of Daniel, a stranger whose smile had made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could start again. In bed, she turned off the light but didn't sleep right away. The rain still whispered outside. And her mind replayed the small moments of the day, the laughter, the way he looked at her when she spoke, the feeling of being truly seen. She didn't know if she would see him again, but even the thought made her heart beat a little faster. Sarah had spent years believing her story was over. That love and warmth belonged to a past she couldn't return to. But that day at the bookstore showed her something simple yet powerful, that sometimes new chapters begin quietly, without warning. As she drifted off to sleep, she whispered to herself, "Maybe kindness finds its way back." And somewhere deep in her heart, she believed it in the weeks that followed. Sarah and Daniel began to see each other more often. It started with chance meetings at the bookstore, then with texts about books, and soon turned into shared coffee breaks and quiet walks by the lake. There was no rush between them, no promises, just two people slowly learning how to feel comfortable again. Sarah liked that about him. He didn't try to impress her, didn't talk too much, didn't make her feel small. With Daniel, silence wasn't awkward, it was peaceful. Every time they met, Sarah found herself opening up a little more. She told him about her marriage, about how it had faded rather than fallen apart. She admitted she still struggled with guilt, wondering if she had stopped trying too soon. Daniel listened with quiet patience, never interrupting. When she finished, he said gently, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for what broke you. Sometimes things just And those words stayed with her. She wasn't used to someone understanding without judgment. In Daniel's company, she felt like she could breathe again. He made her laugh about small things like how he always lost his car keys, or how he once tried to cook dinner for his daughter and nearly set off the smoke alarm. He was kind, gentle, and a little clumsy in a way that felt real. Still, Sarah was careful. Her heart had learned how to protect itself. Every time she began to feel close to him, a quiet fear crept in, reminding her of how love had once slipped away without warning. She didn't want to repeat old mistakes. She didn't want to depend on anyone again, only to be left standing in the silence. One evening, they met at the lake after work. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. They sat on a wooden bench, sipping coffee, watching the ripples in the water. Daniel looked at her and smiled. "You look peaceful tonight," he said. Sarah chuckled softly. "That's rare for me." He tilted his head. "Maybe peace just needed time to find you again." She didn't respond right away. The way he said it made something stir inside her. She realized she hadn't felt this kind of calm in years. It wasn't passion or excitement. It was something gentler, deeper, a feeling that told her she was safe. Daniel looked out at the lake. "You know, when my marriage ended, I thought that was it. I didn't think I could ever feel connected to someone again. But lately, I'm starting to believe maybe second chances don't come in big ways. Maybe they start small, like meeting someone in a bookstore." Sarah turned to him, caught off guard by his honesty. She smiled softly. "Maybe you're right." They sat quietly for a while, watching the last bit of sunlight fade. When it grew dark, Daniel walked her to her car. Before she got in, he said, "Sarah, you don't have to say anything. But I just want you to know I really enjoy spending time with you." Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting that, though part of her had known it all along. She smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "I enjoy it too." When she got home, Ethan was sitting on the porch, headphones in, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, Mom," he said, looking up. "You were out late." Sarah smiled, setting her bag down. "Just went for a walk." He studied her for a second. "You've been smiling a lot lately." She laughed softly. "That's a bad thing." "No," he said quickly, smiling. "It's nice to see. I like it." She felt a lump in her throat. He was growing up so fast, more observant than she realized. For years, he had seen her carry sadness quietly, and now he was noticing her healing. That night, as she tucked herself into bed, she couldn't help thinking how much her son's kindness had started all of this. His small, thoughtful words had been the spark that allowed her to open her heart again. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself thinking about Daniel more often. She would remember the way he listened, the warmth in his eyes, the calm in his voice. But every time she started to imagine what might come next, she pulled herself back. She had built her world around safety, around control, around not being hurt again. Letting herself feel too much, even something good, scared her. Then one afternoon, she got a text from Daniel. "Bookstore coffee later. Rain's coming. Thought it'd be the perfect excuse to hide inside." She smiled at her phone for a full minute before replying. "You read my mind?" That evening, as they sat in their usual corner of the cafe, Sarah noticed how natural it felt to be there with him. It wasn't forced or awkward, it was easy. He told her about his daughter Emma, who was in college studying art, and how proud he was of her. Sarah listened, admiring the way his eyes softened when he talked about family. "You're a good father," she said quietly. He smiled. "I try. Though she tells me I overthink things too much." Sarah laughed. Maybe that's what good parents do. For a moment, their eyes met and held. It wasn't a loud or dramatic connection, just something quiet and certain. A feeling that said, "I see you. I understand you." Sarah felt her heart stir again, and this time, she didn't fight it. When they left the cafe, rain had started to fall. Daniel offered his jacket, and she hesitated, but took it. As they walked under the soft rain, sharing an umbrella, Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Not the rush of young love, but something deeper, steadier. When they reached her car, she handed his jacket back. "Thank you," she said, smiling. He shook his head. Keep it. Just bring it next time, next time. She repeated playfully. He grinned. You didn't think I was done talking about books, did you? She laughed, shaking her head. No, I didn't. That night, Sarah lay awake, thinking about how life could surprise you in the quietest ways. How something as simple as meeting someone new could begin to heal wounds you thought would never close. Daniel hadn't tried to fix her. He hadn't promised anything. He had simply shown up, and somehow that was enough. The next morning, as she made breakfast, Ethan walked in and leaned on the counter. Mom, he said carefully, you've been different lately, in a good way. Sarah looked up, curious. Different how? He smiled softly. You just seem happier, lighter. I like seeing that. She felt her eyes well up but tried to hide it by busying herself with the toaster. That means a lot, sweetheart. Ethan hesitated, then said something that made her heart ache, in the best way possible. You've done everything for me all these years. You deserve to have someone who makes you happy too. Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes filled with emotion. He was still her little boy, yet in that moment he spoke with the tenderness of someone far older. She walked over and hugged him tightly. Thank you, Ethan. You have no idea how much that means. That night, as the house grew quiet, Sarah realized that life had given her a gift she never expected. Not just a man who made her feel alive again, but a reminder of the strength and kindness that had always lived inside her and her son for the first time in years. Sarah didn't fall asleep replaying the past. She closed her eyes thinking about tomorrow and the small, beautiful chances it might bring. Winter came quietly that year. The trees outside Sarah's house stood bare, their branches glistening with frost in the early light. But inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of cinnamon candles and something else, laughter. It had been months since she met Daniel, and somehow his presence had blended into her life as naturally as morning coffee. He came by often, sometimes with a book in hand, sometimes just to help with little things around the house. Ethan had grown used to seeing him around and seemed to like him, which comforted Sarah more than she could say. On a Saturday evening, Sarah was setting the table for dinner. Daniel had promised to stop by and bring dessert. Ethan was helping her, placing plates carefully and joking about how Daniel always forgot something. Watch, he's going to forget the dessert this time, Ethan teased. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. He's been trying hard lately. Give him some credit. Just then, there was a knock at the door. When Sarah opened it, Daniel stood there with snow on his shoulders, holding a pie and wearing a grin. See? I didn't forget this time, he said proudly. Ethan laughed from the kitchen. Guess I owe you an apology, Daniel. They all sat down to eat, the atmosphere light and full of warmth. Daniel and Ethan got along well, talking about music, movies, and life after high school. Sarah sat back, watching them with quiet joy. For so long, dinner had been silent, filled with the sound of forks and knives, but not laughter. Now the house felt alive again. After dinner, they moved to the living room, sitting by the fireplace. Daniel handed Sarah a small gift, a book wrapped in brown paper. Open it, he said with a shy smile. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a new edition of Letters to Tomorrow, the same book that had brought them together. Inside the cover was a handwritten note for the woman who reminded me that quiet hearts can still dream. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she read it. This is beautiful, she said softly. Daniel smiled gently. You deserve beautiful things. Ethan, pretending to look away, hid his smile. He was happy to see his mother like this, glowing not with excitement, but with peace. It was the kind of happiness that came when someone found comfort after years of loneliness. Later that night, after Daniel left, Ethan helped his mom clean up. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now, alive with warmth instead of emptiness. As they put away the dishes, Ethan said suddenly, You look happy, Mom. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling. I am, she said truthfully. I like him, Ethan continued. Daniel's good for you. Sarah looked at her son, realizing just how grown up he sounded. You think so? He nodded. Yeah, you've been through a lot. You deserve someone who treats you right. She walked over and hugged him, her eyes glistening. "You're the reason I found the courage to let someone in again. You know that?" He pulled back, confused. "Me?" She smiled softly. "It started the morning you told me I looked pretty. You said it so easily, but those words, they made me see myself differently. You reminded me that I still mattered." Ethan looked touched, unsure what to say. "I just said what I saw, Mom." "That's what made it so special," she whispered. That night, when she went to bed, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about how much had changed in a few short months. She had gone from living in quiet emptiness to rediscovering warmth, laughter, and love. Not the kind of love that rushed or demanded, but one that healed slowly and kindly, the kind that made her believe again. The next day, Sarah invited Daniel and Ethan to go ice skating at the park. It had been years since she'd done anything like that. The air was crisp, the ground dusted with snow, and the sound of laughter filled the rink. Daniel held her hand as she tried to keep her balance, teasing her every time she wobbled. "You're doing great," he said with a smile. "Oh, sure," she laughed. "I've only fallen twice." Ethan skated past them, laughing. "You two are slow." Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had laughed that hard. For a few hours, everything felt simple. No worries, no doubts, just joy. Later, when they sat down with hot chocolate, Sarah leaned back and watched Daniel and Ethan joking together. Her heart felt full. It was strange how life could rebuild itself when you least expected it, quietly, like snow falling on an empty street. As months passed, their bond grew stronger. Daniel never pushed, never tried to rush her into anything she wasn't ready for. He simply stayed, showing up, listening, being there. Sarah realized that love didn't always have to be about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it was just about consistency, kindness, and being seen for who you really were. One evening, as the three of them sat by the fireplace again, Ethan suddenly said, "See, Mom? I told you you'd be happy again." Sarah smiled, her eyes soft. "Yes, you did," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He grinned. "Guess I'm pretty smart," she laughed. "You are." Then, with a quiet seriousness, she added, "You were right in more ways than you know, Ethan. You helped me find hope again. Your words, that small compliment, started everything. It stayed with me, and it reminded me that even small kindness can change a life." Ethan looked touched, but embarrassed. "I didn't do much, Mom." She shook her head gently. "You did more than you think." Daniel, sitting beside her, reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm, steady, the kind that spoke without words. Sarah squeezed his hand back, feeling the peace she had been missing for years settle inside her. That night, when Ethan went to bed, Daniel and Sarah sat quietly by the fire. The room glowed softly, the world outside cold and still. Daniel turned to her and said, "You've built something beautiful here, Sarah. Not just with me, but with your son, with your life. You should be proud." She smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "I'm just grateful. I thought my story was over, but it turns out it was only beginning again." He leaned closer, his voice low and sincere. Sometimes all we need is one person to remind us that we're still capable of being loved. Sarah looked into his eyes and whispered, "For me, that reminder came from my son." Daniel smiled softly. "Then he's a wise young man." Sarah laughed through her tears. "He really is." The fire crackled quietly, filling the silence with warmth. For the first time in years, Sarah's heart was calm. She wasn't chasing happiness anymore, she was living it. As she closed her eyes that night, she thought back to that ordinary morning months ago, when Ethan had looked at her across the breakfast table and said, "You look really pretty today." She hadn't known then that those simple words would change everything, that they would heal her heart, guide her to new love, and remind her that kindness, even the smallest kind, could last a lifetime. And so whenever life felt uncertain, whenever doubt crept back in, Sarah would remember her son's voice, gentle, pure, full of love and smile. Because sometimes the most powerful words are the ones spoken without realizing how deeply they'll stay. They were words that began her second chance and words she carried forever.